Hello, everybody. As you come in, we welcome you. We'll get started here in just a minute or two. We'll get enough time for everybody to get into the session. Just giving enough time for everybody to get into the session, and then we will get started here probably about 3:02. I'll get started on things. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started today. I want to welcome everybody. This is the second webinar for our 2023-2024 School Psych Features Conference. The first webinar we did was a kickoff event back in June. I hope some of you are in attendance for that as well. At that event, we introduced the different pillars of school psychology, and looked at social justice considerations as the forefront of our discussions around all of these different pillars. As we mentioned at that time, we're going to be spending 1 month for the rest of this year for each of the different pillars. We have 6 of them. So this is our first pillar discussion that we're going to have that we're starting today in July. And that is going to be on the topic of leadership. So I do want to welcome everybody. I know it's an incredibly busy time of year, July, everybody's on vacation. So if you're here, I appreciate it a lot. And we would encourage you to share with others about the fact that this is being videotaped and will be available for you and anyone who wants to go back and review this later. So let me start by just introducing you to our presenters today. I'll actually have each of these folks introduce a little bit about themselves as they go to their parts, but basically I want you to know that our Futures Conference Committee, Steering Committee has been divided into different work groups, and these 5 individuals have been working together the last couple of months to prepare for this webinar. And so it includes myself, Lori Unruh, Lori Close, Celeste Malone, Heather Thompson, and then Sissy from Greece was not able to be with us today. She just finished putting together the ISPA conference. It was a pretty big event, and she had a lot to do there. And so we've given her some grace to not have to be here today as well. So real quickly for myself, let me just do a brief introduction. I am the school psychology program director for Western Carolina University's school psych program. Been here for 18 years. Prior to that, I spent about 15 years working as a practitioner in the field, including in Asheville, North Carolina, as well as in Phoenix, Arizona. So I'll let the others introduce themselves when we get to their parts. The agenda for today is I'm going to provide a very quick overview of some guidelines and what we want to see in terms of follow-up activities. What you're going to see with the Futures Conference, these webinars are never a one and done thing. There's always further opportunities to do some discussions, and we want to make sure that that's highlighted here. Then I will do a very, very quick introduction to the idea of leadership as one of the pillars of school psychology. We'll introduce the history of school psychology again very briefly, and then the majority of our time today is going to be spent with 4 panelists who are going to share with us some of their current experiences and challenges of leadership in school psychology. So we're excited for that. Then we'll spend again a brief amount of time talking about the future needs, and again, highlighting how you can continue to be involved in this discussion as we go forward. Our guidelines, first of all, we did make the chat function accessible this year. thanks to Celeste, I'm always forgetting to get this on. She's kind of sent a welcome to everybody. We'll continue to have this open. What I would encourage you to do right now is if we could just have some of you share where you're coming from so we can see who we're working with today. And then I would encourage you to continue to share some of your thoughts and questions throughout the webinar. We may have time at the end to answer some questions. If not, like I said, we're going to have lots of opportunities for further discussion. So keep sharing with us as we go here. Here's the things that we've got available after the webinar. We're going to have a group sharing Padlet available. We will have 3 online Zoom discussions that you can register for, where we'll have smaller groups of people who and have a kind of a structured guideline for some discussions around this note-taking that we can share with our steering committee and gather some of that information. Thanks to everybody for sharing some of your locations here. And then finally, this discussion guide and note catcher that we're going to use in these 3 Zoom discussions will be available on the website. And you can create your own discussion group with whoever you want and use that note catcher and that discussion guide and put together some ideas that you would like to share with the steering committee from your own discussions. So we want to give a lot of different opportunities for everybody to follow up on these discussions. We'll talk about this a little bit more at the end as well. So as an introduction, why did we decide leadership should be one of the pillars of school psychology? First of all, I think if you've spent any time at all looking at the standards and ASL standards for school psychology, the practice model, you'll see that leadership comes out again and again and again as an important role and function of school psychologists. And I think it's evident that leadership skills contribute to you being, all of us being effective practitioners as school psychologists at the school and district level, as well as at the university level. So if we want to be really effective in our jobs, leadership skills are an important part of that. And then they are also an important part of our advocacy for students, for families, for our profession, all at both the local, state, and national level. And then the next question we had is, why is diversity, equity, and inclusion important for effective leadership? Because as we said, we've got our pillars, but we also have the social justice theme integrated throughout all of this as well. And a couple of points here we wanted to highlight. One is that we need different perspectives when solving some of these really complex problems that we have right now in our schools, in our universities, in our training programs. We need lots of diversity in those perspectives. Especially, we need the perspective of those in the communities most impacted by social injustice and those who are most marginalized. We need to hear these voices, and that needs to come out through them being part of the leadership. We need to also, I'm sorry about the noise back there. I didn't realize there was going to be people outside my office today. We also need to expand our perceptions of who is a leader in order to make sure we have the right people in the right place addressing very specific needs. And we need to expand that. What used to be what we would consider a leader needs to be different now. We need to expand that. It's not just the white males anymore. We need to have other perceptions of who is a leader. And we need to expand the opportunities for everyone to get involved with leadership. This isn't just certain people are going to be leaders. We need to make sure everybody can be, especially those who've been more marginalized, who may have the best perspective on what is needed with some of these more complex problems that we've been talking about. All right, I'm going to send this on to Lori Close, who's going to give you a little bit more of information about some of the historical perspectives regarding leadership. So Lori, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Laurie. we handovers from one Laurie to another. I'm Laurie Close, and I am pleased to say that I am a past president of NASP, not the past president of NASP. We are so excited to see all of you here today. I'm currently beginning a role as a graduate educator again with Baylor University, and also do some private consulting work and have a history of working as a practitioner and a graduate educator over the many years. So I just want to set the stage a little bit because, as Lori said, it's sort of like, why is this important? Why is this something we need to talk about? And in that context, looking back, what has been the role that leadership skills have played both in graduate preparation programs and also in practice of school psychology? And then how have these leadership skills been developed in school psychologists? And then who have been the leaders when we look historically? And hopefully then that will kick us into what's happening right now, and then moving on into what the future can be. Go ahead, Lori. All right. So when we look back at the role of leadership skills in school psychology, four kinds of things come to mind when you think about traditional leadership, kind of leadership with a capital L. In terms of grad ed programs, obviously the program director is typically considered the leader of that institutional facility, and of course supported by other faculty and other structures within the university setting. And when we look at that historically, we notice that even though we are a very female profession, that historically most of the program directors have been male. In addition, most have been white males. Now, there have been changes, there have been improvements, and we are in a better place now than we were, say, in the 70s and 80s, certainly. But still, there is a history of disproportionate numbers of white males in leadership positions, especially at the university level and school psychology. And when you look sort of at the next level of leadership, which is university level leadership, talking about deans or provosts, vice presidents, presidents, those kinds of leadership positions within a university system, those also show some trends over time of becoming more diverse for both gender and race and ethnicity. However, the history is that those roles have more frequently gone to white males. And so we want to think about what is the impact of that on school psychology, especially given that the practitioners and the students in those programs tend to be close to 80% female, and even a higher percentage female and a higher percentage historically minoritized groups in programs. So, you know, you have to think about that and what that looks like and what that messaging might be. Then shifting from that to volunteer leadership positions. A lot of times when people think about leadership, they think about being a leader in NASP or in your state association or in APA or in, you know, those kinds of things. And when we look at that, what we see, if you look at the history that NASP has compiled over the years, is that we have a great deal of disproportionality in terms of when we look at the field and when we look at the greater population of who we serve, and such that lots and lots of white women in leadership positions within professional organizations and those kinds of things. And you know, we have been asking why, and we have been thinking about how to work towards a more diverse leadership body. It's also interesting to think about volunteer leadership positions within a campus or a school system. Like who are the people that volunteer to organize a professional development, organize recruiting strategies, all those kinds of things that aren't technically part of your job description, but would utilize your leadership skills. And who is it that ends up being in those positions, because what they bring to those positions, again, is going to impact how they utilize that leadership opportunity. And so another thing that we think about when we look at the history of leadership skills and how they're deployed in school psychology is that a lot of times, in order to feel like you have a place to use your leadership skills, you have to leave the work, if you will, and go into at the university level, a deanship or a chair, those kinds of things. At the campus or school system level, you have to maybe move from a clinical role into an administrative role. And that can be a big change and may not be someone, wanting to do those kinds of things. Okay, next. Okay, so how have leadership skills been developed historically in school psychology? Well, the first way that I think of is anecdotally. It's sort of like if you come to the field with some leadership experience or practice, whether that was when you were an undergrad or when you were a teenager or maybe in your previous career, whatever it happens to be, you come already to your school psychology training program with those skills as something that is desirable when you're being considered for admission to a program, as opposed to looking at leadership skill development as a component of the grad ed process and thinking about that as a critical skill for being a successful school psychologist. So those who tend to naturally possess leadership skills are the ones who have typically been the ones to demonstrate them. It's also interesting to note that the notion of what leadership skills look like are very much rooted in the notion of privilege. And those who come from privileged identities tend to possess those leadership skills that have been valued in our traditional kind of systems that have been quite oppressive to others who have leadership skills that might be viewed differently should their leadership skills not be being attempted to be deployed, if you will, in an oppressive system. So it's a bit of a quagmire there, because basically when you look at the history, we haven't done a great job of tapping all types of leadership skills, because we seem to be very much stuck in a meritocracy, sort of white privilege kind of model of who gets to be the leaders. And that then goes right into the next piece, which is leadership skills tend to be self-selective. Those that already have it tend to be the ones who choose to exercise them, which then they develop theirs more, whereas others may not feel that their leadership skills are valued in the system as it has historically existed, in terms of the type of skills or the access due to not feeling included in a situation because of the issues around inclusivity, diversity, and how that is not only encouraged just for the sake of it, but truly welcomed and integrated into a part of the training program. I mean, when we look in the history, we see that those foci they're very new as foci, if you will. I mean, they have been in the standards, they have been in the program approval requirements, but the focus and the integration and the beginnings of understanding of what that truly means, not just diversity, but inclusivity, is really, something that is fairly new to us as a profession. And then individual selection rather than systemic instruction and development. That's, again, I kind of already talked through that, which is it's if you are a person who naturally or because of your lived experience come with those skills intact, then you tend to be the one who either volunteers or is asked to engage in those leadership roles, because you have those privileged, those characteristics as defined through a privileged lens. And so thinking about how that might impact us. Okay, next. So who have been the leaders? Well, if I think about NASP, and I think this is also because that's what I know the best, but when you also look at APA and other professional organizations, especially at the state level, they're typically self-nomination. And the question is, who nominates themselves? And again, that depends on their leadership experiences, perhaps in their graduate education programs and also in their early career or in their career experiences. And those tend to be the people who have time, who have an inclination, and who are coming from a place of privilege where they feel comfortable saying, pick me, as opposed to those who have been historically minoritized or marginalized. They don't necessarily feel that they're in a place to say, pick me. And so that's something to think about. And what are the implications of having leaders in the professional organizations of school psychology being primarily through self-nomination? And then in addition to that, it has, this is, I have certainly seen this in my time in NASP leadership, that when I entered NASP leadership, it really was about professional and personal connections. It was someone saying, hey, I see in you qualities that might be a good fit for a position that I know is open kind of situation, versus now, using a casting a wider net. So hopefully then encouraging people who have previously unidentified, because possibly they have been previously suppressed, qualities that would be a valuable contribution to the leadership structure. And then finally, and Lori touched on this, and I think this is really kind of a theme for the whole time we're together, is in the past, there's just been little consideration of, do we have the right people in the right place to do the right, to address the important thing at the time? And I think when you look back and you look what the issues were at various times, that the answer to that is perhaps, but that answer to that should be a resounding, of course. But I don't think that historically we're there yet. And so those are some things to consider when setting up what are we going to be talking about as we talk about the current state of affairs.
Okay, thank you, Lori. Sorry, I had a couple things to click there. What we want to move from now is then talking about not just the history, but talking about what are the current experiences and challenges that leaders in school psychology are having, and what have been some of those experiences. So let me start by just talking about the needs. What are the current leadership needs in school psychology? And I'll try to make this fairly brief because I think everybody's fairly familiar with this already. One of our great needs is that we have a lack of diverse representation in school psychology. This is at the graduate student, practitioner, graduate educator level. Knowing that we've got our graduate student diversity is starting to improve, but what happens when those students leave the graduate school? They go out to the practice, go out to universities, and that kind of diversity is gone, and so we have problems there. There's also a lack of diverse representation in our state and national associations where we're supposed to be promoting and advocating for school psychology practices. So this lack of diverse representation is one of the big needs we have currently in our leadership in school psychology. The other two here that are listed are more related to the needs within our educational settings in general. We have obviously, and all of you know this already, big disparities in school discipline, disparities in special education referral and placement due to implicit biases, racism within schools, and we need school psychologists as leaders to step up and take more of a leadership role in trying to solve some of those complex problems. Same thing with this need for more equitable provision of academic and mental health services within schools. And then if we just look at our field in general, we've got this problem of trying to figure out how to provide fair and equitable assessment practices. This is something our field continues to struggle with. We continue to need more research in this area. So there's obvious need for more leadership and school psychologists to help deal with some of these different problems. But even more so, we also need more diverse school psychologists as leaders. So we've got both issues there. And these are their challenges. And what we want to do in this webinar now is to introduce to you some panelists who are going to talk about their leadership experiences and how they have dealt with some of these challenges and how they are maybe addressing some of the needs that we've been talking about. So I'm going to have Heather Thompson introduce herself, and then she will help guide the panelists in their discussions, and we'll do introductions with them. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Heather.
All right, thank you, Lori. So as a quick introduction of myself, my name is Heather Thompson, and I'm a school psychology doctoral student at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. I'm currently completing my internship in Phoenix, Arizona, and next year will complete my postdoctoral fellowship at Boys Town, Nevada. And so, as Lori said, we have 4 school psychology leaders who have graciously volunteered their time to be part of the panel today. In order to save some time, I'm just going to be providing brief highlights of each of the panelists who have extensive amounts of leadership experience. And I'm hoping that they will be able to share more about their background and experiences through their responses to the panel questions. So first we have Shauna Rader Kelly, who is a national certified school psychologist in Bozeman, Montana, where she serves as a school psychologist at Bozeman High School and leads the district's crisis response team. Shauna also has worked as an adjunct professor at Montana State University as a consultant for the Montana Office of Public Instruction and with the Montana State Association. She currently serves on the NASP Board of Directors as the Strategic Liaison for Professional Advocacy. And in 2017, Shauna was recognized as the NASP School Psychologist of the Year. Next, we have Tim Perenboom. Tim has been the school psychology consultant at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction since 2019. He has a master's degree in both school psychology and educational leadership. And prior to joining the Department of Public Instruction, Tim has served in various roles as a school psychologist, autism specialist, and director of special education and pupil services. Next, we'll have Leslie Bonnick, and Leslie is the current NASP delegate for the state of Hawaii and just finished serving 4 years as a Western delegate representative to the National Association. Leslie currently works for schools in Washington State. She has been involved with the Hawaii State Association and the Hawaii Department of Education. Her advocacy efforts involve legislature work at the state level with an overall goal of bridging the gap between the state and national level. And then finally, we will be hearing from Katie Johnson, and she is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin River Falls in their school psychology program. She has been practicing for 22 years in rural Wisconsin and has served on the Wisconsin School Psychologists Association board for about 18 years total, holding various positions such as the regional representative and NCSP parity chair, and is currently in her 2nd year as president. And so panelists, as a reminder, you will leave your cameras on for the duration of the panel. And I'll read through the questions once in the beginning, and then we will move through each of your responses, beginning with Shauna. Additionally, as a reminder, these questions should be considered within the context of the Futures Conference theme of social justice and diversity, and how the strengths and challenges associated with your identity have influenced you as a leader. And so the first 3 questions that our panelists will be responding to are: 1, what is your current leadership role, and what are some examples of how you have been a leader in this role? What additional leadership roles have you played at the local, state, and national levels? 2, how did you develop your leadership skills, and how is your identity expressed through your different leadership roles? And 3, what are some challenges you have experienced in becoming a leader and maintaining your leadership role? What have you done to try to overcome those challenges? What has been successful and what has been less successful? So Shauna, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Heather. Well, as Heather said in the introduction, I am a school psychology practitioner in Bozeman, Montana. That is my day job. But in my volunteer work, I'm currently serving on the NASP Board of Directors as the strategic liaison for professional advocacy. And so in this role, I work with a number of our committees with NASP and our other leaders to further the strategic goals of the association. I have previously worked on goals related to the role of school psychologists as mental and behavioral health providers, and I'm currently working to advance the strategic goal related to promoting the NASP practice model and the comprehensive role and the organizational principles that are outlined in our professional standards. In addition to serving on the board of directors, I am also still involved with state association leadership for the Montana Association of School Psychologists. I chair our credentialing and professional standards board, and our work is largely related to advocating for credentialing standards that align with our national standards, upholding strong credentialing standards in the state of Montana, and addressing our professional practices and promoting those professional standards in our state and with other leaders and decision makers. And I also chair our state's crisis response committee. And so we provide consultation and training and resources to school psychologists and school districts that are engaged in crisis preparedness planning and also in their crisis response efforts. Prior to being on the board of directors for NASP as the strategic liaison, I was on the board of directors as the Western Region delegate representative, and I served as the Montana delegate to NASP. And I've also been involved in my state association as an officer and as a president and as a committee member. With regard to how I've developed my leadership skills, I think this has happened both formally and informally. NASP has afforded me so many opportunities for formal professional development related to leadership, how to be a better leader, how to be a better board member, how to be a more engaging leader, but also how to be a better steward of our profession and our national association. But I think in addition to those explicit opportunities for leadership development, kinds of professional development, I have gained so much just from the opportunities to learn from my colleagues. And I think specifically about opportunities to learn about things like social justice and equity and diversity and inclusion, because I'm starting my 20th year in the field. And I will tell you that those were topics that were not at the forefront of my training. And so I feel like the opportunities to learn from my colleagues through these leadership experiences has just been so valuable to me in terms of increasing my awareness about these topics, but making me a better leader as I infuse this knowledge into the work that I'm doing for my district, for my state association, and for our national association. I also reflect too on just informal opportunities that I've had to develop as a leader, and largely from learning and observing other leaders that I respect and admire. And this is everything from like watching people facilitate meetings and how they engage group members and how they bring people into a conversation and acknowledge and help to bring to the forefront different kinds of perspectives, but also how they address difficult questions and how they ask difficult questions or address challenging topics. And so in addition to those formal opportunities for leadership development, I think it's just been invaluable for me to spend time with other leaders who teach me so much about how to be a better leader. And I take that with me in all of my leadership experiences. And there's so many people, some of them are on this webinar, who like they are the voice in my head when I am in a position and I'm struggling. I reflect on what they do, and I think about how they might respond, and I try to bring a bit of that into my leadership experiences when things get difficult. With regard to challenges that I've experienced in leadership, I think one of the biggest challenges that I think we face in general as leaders in this profession is finding that balance between advocating for the ideals that will advance the profession, looking to the future while also staying grounded and acknowledging the reality of life in the field. School psychologists are faced with so much on a day-to-day basis, just in juggling the work that they do with students and in school systems and with families. And I think that one of the challenges that I feel like I face as a leader is being sure that we're looking to those ideals and we're looking at those things that advance the profession, but also acknowledging what it's like day to day for school psychologists who are just navigating the challenge of doing this work. And it just seems like the need to do that just continues to grow. I do think that my experience as a practitioner do help me with this. I walk the halls of a high school on a day-to-day basis with serving 1,200 students by myself. And so I truly understand what it's like to work in systems that are imperfect. My ratio is an imperfect ratio. But I find that balance in being able to work in that imperfect system and also continue to work for and advocate for those ideals of the profession, because it's what we need. It's what we need for our colleagues. It's what we need for this profession, but it's what we need for the kids and the families that we serve. I reflected on this question too a bit from a personal level as well, and just like acknowledging that volunteer leadership is hard and can be challenging. And so I feel like for me, one of the challenges that I face in leadership is finding that balance between being an effective volunteer leader, because sometimes volunteer leadership can feel like it's its own full-time job, and balancing that with the life of a full-time working professional. And I'm balancing those things against, trying to also be like an effective wife, an effective mom, and like carrying all those other roles that I carry as well. And so I think those have been challenging for me. I'm a second generation school psychologist. My mom was a school psychologist, and she was always a volunteer at the state association level. Even though she was a single mom, she was oftentimes working like multiple jobs. She found time for leadership. And I often reflect on how she did that. I can't imagine doing what I do without the support of my family. But one of the things that she instilled in me is just how important leadership and volunteering is, but also the importance of finding that professional community and nurturing that professional community. And so to me, like those are the kinds of challenges that I have faced, but also like recognizing that other people have done it and looking to find that support from others when things feel challenging.
Shauna, thank you so much for your responses. And I think your responses made me think that we really should shift the panel so that we can all kind of answer the same question at a time, because I see the panelists nodding and responding and really reacting to what you say. So I think it might be a good opportunity to allow for more of a discussion between the panelists. So sorry, panelists, for throwing you off of the original plan. But we'll go ahead and continue with Tim, Leslie, and Katie, if you could kind of provide your responses for question 1, and then we'll go from there. Thank you, Shauna.
All right, this is Tim Pierman. I assume we're still going in the same order. I guess I'll just throw out my script though, since I'm only doing one question at a time. So for the first question, my current role is I'm the school psychology consultant at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. So in terms of leadership role, I'm actually paid. It is my job to be a leader in school psychology. In fact, I like to joke with my friends that I'm a big deal, because when I applied for this position, the job posting described it as the face of school psychology in Wisconsin. So, and it's literally in my job description. I think it's debatable. You'll meet Katie in a minute. I would argue that she's probably the actual face of school psychology in our state. But yeah, it's literally my job description to provide expert leadership, consultation, and technical assistance in a variety of areas that cover school psych practice, special education compliance, mental health supports in schools, suicide prevention. I work with the graduate programs in our state for their to make sure their programs are producing school psychs that are able to be licensed in the state. I provide ongoing professional development. We do consultation with parents on topics like bullying, discipline, attendance. I am the liaison, our state liaison to our state school psych association. And like all school psychs, I also have other duties as assigned. So I am on other committees and things in our agency as well. In terms of my identity and how that sort of plays with into my current role. I'm a white cisgender male, so I do check a lot of the boxes that come with a lot of privilege in our society and our culture. So with that, and being the face of school psychology in Wisconsin, I do work pretty hard to sort of demonstrate to people I'm collaborating with and stakeholders, both from marginalized and minoritized groups, but also to other people that come from a similar place of privilege as me, that I am an advocate and a trustworthy ally in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So to me, a lot of what I work on is making sure that in the work groups that I'm on, when I'm presenting, things like that, being really vigilant that being welcoming is not just something that I do right at the beginning and do some sort of inclusion activity or anything, but the trick is sort of maintaining that throughout my work, whether it's a workshop or a work group meeting, whatever it might be. So I think one of the ways I do that is I try and focus on results. So while hard to say how much of just my identity sort of got me into this role and my position, certainly the experiences and advantages that I had that got me to this point certainly rolled into that. So while I focus on projects, and that helps me prioritize. So I focus on projects that impact a relatively small sort of raw number of students or school psychologists, that it's important work. So I focus on seclusion and restraint reduction across the state, emotional behavioral disability identifications and evaluations in our state, supporting LGBTQ+ students, alternatives to suspension and expulsion are sort of the areas that I focus on that really impact a relatively low number of students, but have some really, really ugly disproportionality data behind them.
Thank you, Tim. Leslie, then Katie, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, I'm so confused now. And we just answering question 1 because they're doing all 3.
Yeah, I think we'll try to have you and Katie kind of do question 1 and question 2 and go through question. We'll do it separately. Yeah.
Okay, so I currently am the NAS delegate for the state of Hawaii. And prior to that, I was treasurer for a long time, president. So I've been out in Hawaii for about 12 years now. And it's interesting here, I'm talking about number 2. In Hawaii, there's so few of us. We have the fewest amount of school psychologists in the nation in our state. So it's literally, if you have any kind of expressed interest or you don't have kids in a family, they're like, so what position would you like on the board? And so it's kind of been that way since I started. Like warm bodies in a way was how you became a leader, and you could get suckered into it. The joke used to be if you went to a conference, if you went to a conference with me and went drinking, that you'd end up on the HAS board, which was true for several years. However, so a lot of what I've done as a leader and in this role is developing other leaders. And so I try to systematically go around and make sure we have leadership representation from every island, because the unique needs of the students that we serve can vary from island to island out here, even though our LEA and SEA are one and the same. So we don't have a different local education agencies in Hawaii. Our state education agency is our local. In addition, Hawaii remains the only state in the nation without a credential for school psychologists. So I wrote the bill for credentialing for school psychologists and have spent the last 10 years trying to establish licensing for school psychologists in our state so that we have title protection, minimum standards. Unfortunately, we have school psychologists who are not school psychologists in school psych roles using that title. And so that has been probably my biggest example of how I've been a leader in that particular role. The other thing I did was I spent 4 years on the NAS board of directors. I just fell off about 2 weeks ago. And it's been different because I don't think they've had like a NAS board member from Hawaii before. And so there's been a couple of times where there's been broad speak about Indigenous groups, and I'm able to reach out to my Native Hawaiian friends and say, hey, I need some opinions on this, or I need some feedback from the Native Hawaiian community, because all Indigenous communities aren't the same. Or a lot of times when we talk about Indigenous people, we're talking about mainland Indigenous people, and Alaska Natives and Hawaiian Natives are really forgotten about. And if you saw my land acknowledgement acknowledgement state in, Hawaii is an overthrown kingdom. They are the newest to the oppressed group of people. And so I often bring that up. And in addition to that, I'm a queer person and in a relationship with a woman from Uganda. And so sometimes my unique kind of identity as a person have been able to influence my leadership roles of kind of being in a relationship with somebody who's an immigrant, in being maybe one of the only LGBTQ people in that room or in that conversation. And so I've sort of been able to, just offer unique perspectives maybe in some of those types of things. So that's number one. Thank you.
All right. And I'm Katie. I am currently president of the Wisconsin School Psychologists Association. This is my second year in that role. We have a 2-year presidency, a 4-year kind of leadership cycle of president-elect, 2 years president, and 1 year past president. So some examples of leadership. When I took over not too long after COVID, and we had only about just over half of our board positions filled at that point in time. We have a really big board with about 30 different board members, including regional representatives. So it was a daunting task to try to fill those positions. But I think like kind of my leadership style is about engaging people, connecting people, encouraging, trying to figure out who's the right person for the right role. How do we get people who are excited about doing this work into these roles, and really how to keep them excited about it? I keep saying this to my board. I think everybody gets into leadership because they're excited about working for our profession or whatever your leadership role is. You're excited about something there. And how do we engage that and keep people excited? We also had a lot of inactivity on the board, which I think goes to what I just said. We had very few action plans completed. Our activities weren't necessarily aligned to our strategic plan. It was really unclear if somebody, when I was trying to fill board positions and people wanted to know more, it was unclear to me what all these roles entailed. How much time does that entail? That kind of thing. So really, I've been working on trying to put systems in place with our board so that structurally it supports people who want to volunteer and to do that work, so that that can last way longer than my presidency. Another thing I've been working on is making our association as a whole more welcoming and inclusive. I talk about it all the time with our board. What can we do differently to make sure we're engaging our membership, make sure they feel like they're part of what we're doing, that they have a voice in what we're doing? We've increased our social media presence from nothing to, we're engaging thousands of people with our posts at this point. And really looking at making our conventions more inclusive so people feel like, everyone feels like they have a spot there and a group that they fit in with. That's kind of an ongoing goal of mine. And part of that is engaging with different associations. That's been really interesting, is engaging with the school social workers who have very similar interests to us at the state level. Engaging with Tim and DPI. He's been an amazing support to me over the last few years in moving some of this work forward. And I guess for me, when we talk about leadership roles, the first year was really fun. It was all about, for this role, it was all about getting people engaged and connecting and talking. And now this year, it looks like it's moving into more a hardcore work year for me, trying to do that hard work of changing systems, of fixing things that aren't effective, moving people off center when they need to be. So those are, and implementing budget cuts. So those are kind of the things leadership role wise that I have been working on.
Okay, I'll just jump back for number 3 real quick. Sorry. So some of the challenges have been interesting. So I actually got fired from my job for some of my advocacy work. And I have been in a 2.5-year arbitration with the Hawaii Department of Education because of it. So overcoming that challenge has been interesting. I honestly, I get treated better and I make more money for the state of Washington being a virtual psych, and I'm still able to advocate in the state of Hawaii. So it's kind of interesting because with that, my board has stepped up and they are having louder voices, because they're like, well, if I get fired, I can just make more money elsewhere. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's not necessarily what I wanted you all to learn. But I think one of the things that's been most successful is we've partnered with other organizations and formed coalitions in our state. So it's all of the SISPs, all of the instructional support personnel, SLPs, OTs, PTs, et cetera, that are kind of facing that in Hawaii, where we're all doing the job of 2, 3, 4, 5 people. And so the advocacy is really, really, really important around that. And we're always changing state leaders, and we're dealing with a lot of political corruption in our state. Like, you can literally Google Hawaii corruption and a whole lot of stuff will come up anyway. And so it's really difficult to make systems change happen in a state where you have a politically corrupt system and you have people who are changing leadership all the time, and you're trying to get in and you're trying to like, oh, we have a new superintendent. Because again, we have one superintendent, we have one board of education. And if that's corrupt and you can't penetrate that, then what do you do when you're trying to work with your state? So a lot of the challenges have been getting other leaders to step up and not be afraid because of the persecution that a lot of us get when we do speak out, changing leadership roles at the state level, and then just being able to, the success has been working with other groups of leaders and other like-minded professions in order to do that. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I can jump back because I guess I didn't finish number 1 too. It talked about additional leadership roles. So I've been on our school psych board most of my career, maybe 2 years in. I was asked to be on the board, and you talked about that earlier, talking about systems. That's kind of that tap to be a leader by somebody who recognizes your leadership ability, which is still how we're getting. I mean, that's how I'm filling out our board, but I'm working more on having a model, like NAS does with want ads and job descriptions and that kind of thing, so that hopefully we can pull in people who aren't connected to board members currently or aren't coming to our conventions to do that. So I've held a lot of different WISPA board positions. I was a regional representative. I coordinated the regional reps. I coordinated a mental health certificate for the state, worked on NCSP parity. I'm also a previous NAS delegate from Wisconsin. I did a 3-year term a few years back. And on the local level, I am the, sorry, the comments pop up and I get distracted. On a local level, I'm a leader within our people services team. I also chair our mental health collaborative, which is working on equitable and ethical systems of providing mental health support for students. And I'm on multiple school committees and community boards. I think once you get tapped for leadership, you get tapped for lots of leadership, which is also one of the challenges. So my next question is, do you want me to answer 2 and 3, or where are we going from here?
I think we'll go ahead and Lori, if you move to the next slide, I think all you have shared so much work that you are doing and has even just brought to light so many of the needs that are there for leaders to have done. So I'd like to kind of hear more about the second question here on this slide, and we'll kind of go through. So it is not lost on us that we are discussing the need for diverse and multicultural leadership in school psychology, but we do have a panel of all white school psychologists. So as we strive to eradicate barriers to school psychology and become a more inclusive profession, how will you use your privilege to elevate the perspectives of marginalized school psychologists and create a space for them to lead? Shauna, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Thanks, Heather. I mean, I think first of all, I just want to say thank you for calling attention to this and including this question in the panel discussion, because I don't believe that this is a question that would have been asked 10 years ago, unfortunately. And so I think one of the first steps for those of us in leadership is recognizing these things and calling attention to it, acknowledging it when we see the lack of diversity, when we see the lack of representation, and from that position of privilege, making it known that this is something that's important and it needs to be addressed. And I think it's not just enough for us to talk about the lack of diversity in leadership, but we have to be actionable and intentional about addressing it and actively working to increase that diversity. And diversity, speaking very broadly, diversity in a variety of different ways. I think we have to ensure that those opportunities to serve in leadership are not just available, but that they're also meaningful and rewarding. And for me, this means not only like seeking out diversity in leadership, but really seeking to understand those diverse perspectives and responding to those. And I think sometimes that might mean doing things differently than we've already done them. And that might feel uncomfortable for those of us in leadership. It might feel uncomfortable in the leadership groups that we work with and in the systems that we work with. But if we truly want to meaningfully increase diversity, it has to be about more than just opening up positions and opportunities. It has to be truly responding to the needs, to the experiences, to the thoughts, to the perspectives that we're hearing. I also think too, I think one of the things that's become more and more apparent to me is that we have to acknowledge that there are reasons that some people don't seek leadership opportunities, because there have been instances where those leadership spaces have not been welcoming, where those perspectives have not felt welcoming, and they haven't felt valued. And so to me, I think we also have to acknowledge and actively address that, and ensuring that when we're providing those opportunities, that we're creating welcoming and inclusive spaces, that we're not just seeking diversity in leaders, but truly honoring the participation and valuing those contributions. And I think, like, for me in my leadership journey, as a person coming to my leadership experiences from a position of privilege, I feel like the most important thing that I can do is really more about listening and listening and seeking to understand and seeking to help other people understand. And I also truly believe that this is more than just about leadership. And I think I often go to thinking about leadership in my volunteer capacity, but also thinking about this leadership in our professional work and how we're elevating those perspectives of the students and the families that we serve, and creating in school psychologists really a feeling of like that everyone feels that they're a leader in doing this work in whatever capacity that they work in. And so I do think that there's so many things that Lori and Laurie said at the beginning of the presentation that are resonating with me, and I reflect on some of the work that Tim is doing in Wisconsin around some of those topics. And I think elevating the role of school psychologists to be leaders in addressing those issues in whatever capacity they work is so important.
Thanks, Sean. I'll jump right in then. Yeah, I love this question. I love it came up in the Q&A. The key words to me in that question that you see on the slide are elevate and create space. Again, as a white male and in Wisconsin, our school psych workforce is, I just looked earlier today, it is 93% white. So it does take an intentional effort to do the elevating and create that space and make it more welcoming. And another way to put it to, again, a white cisgender man like myself is for me to know when to help lift and when to just know to get out of the way. I recognize that school psychs who've been marginalized work twice as hard, if not harder, than I have to get to get a seat at the table, to get into the spaces that I need to advocate or to be involved and make a difference. So at times it's just getting out of the way and creating space. Other times it is leveraging my privilege to sort of help lift or elevate a marginalized person or group just by removing barriers to access and making it more welcoming. And just clearing space sometimes is necessary to use my privilege to do that, just because there's certain times when the structural racism that's just built into our systems is just so strong and so ingrained that it does require some of that extra work. So some concrete examples of ways I try to do that is making sure I'm involving diverse perspectives in the committees, the work groups, focus groups that I might run, which again can be a challenge because we're 93% of our school psychologists in the state are white. So sometimes I just feel like there are times when I'm asking making requests of the same people over and over again. It's the same school psychs who sort of step up and are able to make assist in some of these things that we're doing. So finding that balance of not asking too much of people who are already working really much harder than I need to be in the same space because of my privilege. At the state level, one thing that was very apparent when I first started was that when we recruit, when we screen for new positions, when I'm on an interview committee or I'm screening resumes, at the state level, we don't do blind resume reviews. So there are names, and we know that has an impact on who gets screened through and who gets screened out. So advocating for changes to that, and we are, at least on my team, hopeful that that change is coming soon, or that official policy change is coming soon. Making sure that, again, going back to screening and recruitment, that I'm doing active recruitment of non-white candidates for different positions, to put them in positions at the state level, at the state leadership level, which again is, it's paid leadership opportunities, and that comes with a bigger platform and a bigger microphone and more opportunities to advocate for and make change. I helped write our state school-based mental health professionals grant, which was intentionally written to increase diversity in our professions, not just school psych, but school social work and school counseling. One of the things I sort of only half jokingly point out is in school psychology in Wisconsin, we have one Indigenous school psychologist in our state, and that's not percent, that's literally one person. So our grant in terms of recruitment, and we have a pretty big Native population in Wisconsin. We have 11 federally recognized tribes and then an additional tribe who's not federally recognized. But so one of our school psych or school counseling programs has directly partnered with some of our Native American organizations in the state, and we're increasing Indigenous enrollment in our counseling and school psych programs as best we can. And then the other thing sort of generally that I try and do is a lot of it's building relationships and trusts with people like Katie at WISPA and others, where I will literally get asked sometimes to leverage my privilege to make a suggestion, make a request, recommend a change. And to me, I see those as excellent opportunities to do that, that elevating and creating space where I can say, sure, I can do that, but wouldn't it be better if I just cleared some space for you to do that? And then my role sort of shifts to just supporting and cheering on and sort of encouraging and supporting with things like, if somebody turns to me as the white guy in the room having a discussion about an idea, a lot of times it's things like, well, yeah, I agree with this person. And then I just shut up because I'm very mindful about not wanting to white mansplain things to groups, because that has a tendency to put the credit for an idea or a suggestion on me that I don't deserve. And I guess we'll see in a minute here if Katie agrees with that. But yeah, a lot of it is just creating that space and focusing on, I guess the last thing I would do in those situations is sort of try and coach and collaborate, because again, I come from that demographic where people generally are the ones around the table. I can help coach and, help people speak the language of the cisgender white guys who are generally take up a lot of the table, and to talk in ways and that use the strategies that get people like me to listen.
Well, this is a complicated question for me. Yes, I'm white, but I am white in Hawaii. We're the minority. So when I'm talking about using my privilege to get at the table, I'm not wanted at the table here. So it's a little bit different. I'm also queer, neurodivergent. It's very complicated. So I think I probably am the diverse person at the table here. Anyway, So yeah, this is a complicated one because it's quite the opposite. But I have to say, even when I had two native, like a native Hawaiian and then like a local Filipino girl that were sitting on the board with me, their boss ran them out of the state. And so ironically, our state is mostly run as a Japanese bureaucratic infrastructure with Japanese men at the helm. And that is a whole other ball game. We have a webinar in our HASP library that you can watch if you want to know more information about that, but it's very complicated. In addition to that, school psychology was created by a federal consent decree in the state of Hawaii in 1999. I always wear this shirt. It's school psychology is putting out fires since 1896. And then I say in the legislature, but in Hawaii only since 1999, when the feds made you have us, basically. So we are fighting for school psychology as a profession here. We are the minoritized role group in the department. And so that is what is very strange. And it doesn't matter if you are a local Native Hawaiian person or a white girl or a white man or a Black person, or, you know, we have a number of different school psychologists within the state who have served on our board, and our board does tend to be a little bit more diverse on occasion because of that, or the people that we have involved, at least with our area reps and stuff. However, we have no program here, so everybody has to go to the mainland to go to school and come back. So it's a very, very complicated question to answer. Because where other places I might have the privilege of being white, that is not necessarily a privilege in the state where I'm advocating. And even when it's really more of you say your title and you're like, oh, them, you know, and they kind of put us to the side. So that is why we have kind of gathered with a lot of additional role groups to try to band together, create those coalitions. I think when you are a role group or at a minoritized, whether it's your role group or a different minority status, you know, banding together with other minoritized or marginalized groups can help to sort of strengthen that to move forward. I think the other thing we do within the state of Hawaii is that's what I said about developing leaders. So like I said, we do have a really diverse workforce within school psychology in the state. It still is a majority white, but I think it's prepping them, because I've had some people be like, I can't believe white people are treated like this, and they leave in 2 or 3 months. And I'm like, yeah, you weren't meant for Hawaii. Like, this is where you're not going to get the privilege of being white. Honestly, all white people should serve a year in Hawaii so that you understand what it feels like to be in the minority. It's great. Because it really does, it helps you with that perspective. It helps you with the students that you serve to know what it's like to be in a minority for the first time in your life. So a couple of things, yeah, it was just really weird. Like in grad school, I remember a professor saying, well, you're all white middle class people. And I was like, what? And she was talking about things and making all these assumptions about how we grew up. And all I could think was, I grew up in poverty. My dad was a meth addict in prison. And because I was white, I had all these assumptions thrown on me. And there was nothing about my neurodivergence. There was nothing about my queerness. You know, there was nothing that made me a minority. It was assumptions because I was white, the color of my skin. So I think when we talk about minorities, we need to talk about neurodivergent school psychs. We need to talk about LGBTQ. We need to talk about school psychs with disabilities. I'm also autoimmune with chronic illnesses. These are things that impact school psychs every day in our profession. And when we don't acknowledge that intersectionality, that some people are a person of color and autoimmune, some people are queer and neurodivergent, that we need to be looking at that, and how do we reach to those people and get those people in leadership opportunities, because marginalization and minorities are more than just the color of your skin, and it's more than just sometimes having one marginalization, and we need to be looking at that intersectionality and how do we develop those types of people as leaders and lift them up. And one way we can do that is if you are a leader, mentor. Get involved in the NAS mentoring program. That is something that I've been doing for years. I've got about 8 different mentees now, I think, and they're all at various different stages of their careers, but they all have different kind of things and minoritized backgrounds or ways they grew up or something that makes them have a unique and diverse voice within the field of school psychology. And I've kind of helped them and pushed them into different pathways, whether it be local, state, or national leadership. And I think that's something that anybody listening to this can do, is if you've been in the profession a while and you have any kind of leadership opportunity, you see that in somebody else, especially if they've got some type of minoritized or marginalized background, and you hear that in them, lift them up, push them towards a direction, introduce them to somebody else who can maybe get them into that leadership pathway as well. I think that's how we create space to lead. In addition to that, I think the last question was about staying in leadership. Don't stay in leadership forever or change your leadership role. It's okay to be different and new. It's okay to go back and forth between state and national and local leadership. It's okay to serve in different roles and give somebody else the opportunity. I think those new voices are important, and giving space and time and direction and mentorship to those voices is going to be really important as we progress in the future of school psychology.
Thank you,
That's good.
Leslie. Oh, go ahead, Katie, are you still with us?
Yeah, sorry, my computer keeps shutting down. It's apparently an update. I can't stop. But I love the responses I've heard so far. I agree with what Shauna talked about it not being a welcoming environment. You know, I think we are aware on our state board that we want to try to attract more diverse leaders. We're trying to put some systems in place for it, but ultimately creating that welcoming environment that supports those diverse leaders. I mean, I feel like we can get them here, but can we really sustain that so that everybody really feels like they can contribute, that they're valued, that they're welcome? That is my biggest concern right now. I mean, we created maybe about 4 years ago a social justice committee. And then when we developed our strategic plan, we try to infuse that into everything we do. Every single action plan, whatever, is supposed to be tied to our social justice goals for the organization. And we've tried we've had a goal of recruiting diverse leaders. I don't think it's working particularly well because those of us who are doing the recruiting aren't diverse leaders. So trying to figure out how to recruit and then also sustain leadership. We're newly going to dive into like some affinity groups and stuff, hoping that we can attract, kind of like Leslie was talking about, the bringing people together, understanding intersectionality, bringing people together who has similar backgrounds or things, ways that they have affinity, so that they can feel support and feel like they're wanted in the organization. We're also trying to develop a leadership development sequence course of some sort. One of our board members has really taken that on as an active task to say, how do we, once we get leaders here, how do we really develop that leadership and support people so that they do feel valued and can contribute when they're here?
Great, thank you panelists so much for being able to engage in these discussions and share responses and experiences. I know that I have personally learned so much just from listening to all of you, and I hope that others have as well, and we've begun important discussions. Panelists, you can now turn your camera off, and we'll go ahead and move our attention towards Dr. Malone, who will finish this off here.
It would probably help if I unmuted myself first, and I'm just removing some of the spotlights from the screen. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to attend this Futures Conference Leadership Pillar as we look at the future of the profession. I am Celeste Malone. I'm an associate professor of school psychology at Howard University in Washington, D.C., which notably is one of 2 historically Black universities with a school psychology program. I am also the most recent past president of the National Association of School Psychologists, and I'm the second person of color to serve as NASP president in its 54-year history. So as we look at the topic of leadership, clearly this is something that's very important and close and dear to me, as well as the great need that we have for a more diverse school psychology. And our panelists highlighted that point very much so in their last response. Before I go over the discussion questions, I do want to highlight a couple of the responses that the panelists made. And first was the recognition that our spaces aren't always truly inclusive, which is what contributes to the lack of diversity that we see within school psychology leadership spaces. I encourage you all to view the Futures Kickoff webinar, where I gave the blue sky conversation, and that went into more depth about how oppression shows up within school psychology, especially when we think about leadership. I also heard comments recognizing the cultural taxation that comes with being a minoritized school psychologist and serving in a leadership space. The need for us to have true diversity, so not just representational diversity where the appearance or the demographics of school psychology leadership looks different, but rather we are aiming for meaningful diversity and inclusion where the perspectives of those who've been underrepresented within the profession are brought to the forefront, are centered and elevated. I heard comments indicating an awareness of the structural bias that exists within many school psychology organizations and the role that leaders have to mitigate that bias, as well as leveraging their privilege. We can bemoan the fact that school psychology is overwhelmingly white, female, English monolingual, and non-disabled professionals. That is the state of our profession, but we do have a number of individuals who have privileged sociocultural identities. And so again, instead of bemoaning what we are, it's important for us to lean into the power and privilege that we hold, to recognize it first and foremost, that even when we may be the numerical minority in spaces, nonetheless, living in the society that we live in within the United States, we have to recognize the privilege that we hold when it comes to our race, our gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, ability, nationality, country of origin, and any other facet of who we are, that we need to step into and own the power and privilege that we have and think about how to leverage it responsibly. Presented on your screen are some discussion questions that the leadership subgroup came up with when we reflected on the historical origins as well as the current need of school psychology leadership that you heard in the beginning of this webinar. You'll have the opportunity to discuss these questions in depth in follow-up virtual discussion groups. The first question is, what does leadership look like for school psychologist practitioners, graduate educators, graduate students, and professional association members at local, state, and international levels? All school psychologists have the potential to be leaders, and we need all of us to step into those leadership roles and exercise our leadership so we could tackle those complicated and challenging problems that we encounter in the profession and education more broadly. As you consider this question, remember that leadership is not about titles. It's about how do we exercise our power and privilege to the benefit of others. The second question is, how have the demographics of school psychology influenced who we view as leaders in school psychology and individuals' pathways to leadership in the profession? Recall what Lori discussed earlier with the demographics of the field, and think about how that shapes our perspective of who leaders are and how people are able to access leadership positions. And then the third question, how do we cultivate school psychology leaders who have the critical consciousness to recognize the impact of oppression, possess the knowledge, skills, and dispositions associated with social justice advocacy, and are willing to act despite real or perceived risk? As highlighted in my Blue Sky conversation last month, and as the panelists noted in their discussion, the issues that we face in school psychology and in education more broadly are all rooted in oppression. However, we have to have the knowledge and skills to be able to recognize that. We have to be self-aware. We need to be reflective. We have to have the knowledge and skills to engage in social justice advocacy and recognize that this is a fairly new area for school psychology. There may be some areas that we may be lacking and need further knowledge and skill development. And then finally, that commitment to social justice. As Leslie pointed out in her remarks, advocacy is inherently risky, but we need to be able to act despite any real or perceived risk and demonstrate that moral courage. If you could go to the next slide, please. So this is just the beginning of the conversation. I encourage you all to sign up for one of the virtual discussion groups, and the dates and times of those groups are noted on the screen. On the next slide, we're not going to go to that yet, you'll have the opportunity to sign up. If you're unable to make one of the virtual discussion groups, we do encourage you to hold your own discussion group, whether it's with your state association, colleagues in your district, or within your graduate program. We want you to talk about these questions also. Please download the discussion guide and note taker if you go down that path, and then share the results with the future steering committee. Next slide. And then presented here are QR codes that will take you to a Padlet in which you could engage in further conversation virtually on the questions I presented before. And then there's also a link for you to sign up for one of the Zoom discussion groups. So again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us live, or to watch this recording to talk about the role of leadership as we move towards a more equitable and just future within school psychology. Thank you.